got together and thought about, what was going on in the landscape of Philadelphia, why it's important for us as a community of people, of nonprofit leaders, of funders, just the people who care about what's going on, come together to really have a conversation about what we can do to make it better, like really make it better. Like, let's not just put a Band-Aid on it, let's not just talk about how to help a handful of people, but let's actually move the needle and get to the root of the issues that are at hand. So this is our premier panel event, 360 Philanthropy, which is kind of giving you that 360-degree view of what's going on. I put it in my phone as 370, and I was like, yeah, we need an extra 10%. Like, we should go 10 more degrees in figuring out, like, let's not just solve the problem, let's solve it and make sure it's solved forever. And coming into this week, we were gracious enough for Brick and the Regional Foundation Center and Ms. Caitlin to graciously offer to be our partner and sponsor and let us host this year. So I want to give a round of applause for
Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming out today. I see some familiar faces, but has anyone never been to the Brick before? Awesome. Okay, well, welcome back to those of you who have been here before. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about our programs and services here. So the Brick is the Business Resource and Innovation Center. We are a resource center for business owners and entrepreneurs, nonprofits, job seekers, and inventors. So I'm specifically in charge of the nonprofit services here in the Brick. You may know us as a regional foundation center. A lot of different names, a lot of different acronyms. But in the regional foundation center, we help nonprofits by providing access to high-quality research databases, to help find funding opportunities. So we have access to Foundation Director Online Professional, Wealth Engine, Foundation Maps, and GuideStar Premium. If you've never used those resources and would like to learn how, we offer one-on-one research appointments with librarians, and we'll sit down with you one-on-one and show you how to use those resources geared towards your specific needs. We also offer free programs like the one you're at here today. We usually offer about 4 to 6 free programs a month, and those run the gamut, anything from grant writing to board development to financial issues to our bi-monthly nonprofit Nerds Meetup. So I have some flyers over there about our upcoming events. I think aside from these programs, the only other program we're doing this month is Board Boot Camp on Thursday. So if any of you are board members or would like to share that information with your board members, it's a great opportunity for new board members or more advanced board members to kind of brush up on their skills. A couple other things that we do here in the Brick that I just wanted to highlight. You'll notice that we have some really great meeting rooms. So we have 2 small meeting rooms over here that hold 2 to 4 people, and then a larger meeting room on the other side of the room. Those are available to be used for free. So if your nonprofit organization is looking for a free meeting room space to host a meeting, a board retreat, just want to get out of the office, please feel free to send us an email. We're happy to take a look at our calendar and see if there's a space available for you. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight one of our most popular services here in the Brick, and that is our free headshots. We offer free headshots twice a month. So if you're looking for a professional photo for your LinkedIn profile or website, if you want to have staff photos of your organization on your website, you want them all to look the same, bring on your whole staff and we can do each of their headshots for them. So all of those dates are listed on our calendar, and again, all the information, all of our resources are over here. I'm going to be around for the rest of the day, so please feel free to talk to me if you have any questions. So thank you all for coming.
Great.
Okay, so by show of hands, how many people got the email with the link to the bios? All right. So we have a great panel here, and I'm going to give a brief overview of each person, and if you would like their full bios, give us your email at the end and we can email you out the full bios. I'm not sure which way they sit, so I'm going to come around, but we almost had murder. But so on the far end is Tabani Kapoor. So Tabani is currently works as a manager of partnership and outreach at the Urban Affairs Coalition, where he helps social entrepreneurs leverage fiscal sponsorship to jumpstart their nonprofit endeavors. Familiar with fiscal sponsorship? Yeah. He's an amazing guy. He has many diverse roles. And I was looking, do you do like publishing or something like that?
I write for Generosity and a few other places as well.
So outside, he does a little bit of writing as well. And we're happy to have Savani on board because he brings that those years of diverse experience around nonprofits and also his ability to talk about fiscal sponsorship and what he's seeing in the landscape around nonprofits partnering with UAC and other organizations. Next to Savani is Mr. Omar Woodard. So Omar is the executive director of the Greenlight Fund of Philadelphia, a nonprofit venture capital firm investing to improve economic mobility, and he's also an adjunct professor at professor of business at Temple University. Omar is on the board of Philanthropy Network of Greater Philadelphia, Global Philadelphia Association, Maternal Care Coalition, and the Drawer College Foundation. Mr. Omar Woodard is on our panel today because of his venture philanthropy experience and the idea that scalability within your nonprofit as well as partnerships is something that he's consuming as funded, and also talks to the landscape of Philadelphia and what's going on within that realm. Suleiman is like, I want to say a mentor, but we're not that far apart age, so I can't say that. But you know, he dragged me onto Diverse Force, where he is the founder and CEO of. And Diverse Force is a partnership with the University of Pennsylvania which develops diverse leaders through an innovative leadership development program that prepares mid to senior level professionals of color to serve more effectively on nonprofit governing boards. He serves as the vice president of the board of directors at Community College of Philadelphia Foundation. He's a board of trustee and executive committee member of Mastery Charter Schools, board member of the Kimmel Center and Lendistry, which is FinTech of CDFI, and he has a number of other boards and committees. I'm not sure where he finds the time, and he's also a parent, so I really don't know. And because of all of that, he's on this panel today. Mr. Mike O'Brien, who's also a host committee member for Philanthropy Week, is the director of learning at the Village Arts and Humanities, a nonprofit headquartered in North Philadelphia. He is currently also a Corzo Fellow at the Corzo Center for Creative Economy at the University of the Arts, and an Innovation Fellow at the Drexel University's Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation, in support of a startup venture, HD2 Solutions, which works with organizations and their employees to transform how they understand and support human development, interaction, and performance. He has worked with clients such as Neighborhood Voice America, Artist Year, the District 1199C Training and Upgrading Fund, and StaffSuite, who is also a sponsor of ours and is hosting all of our coffee conversations. Our next one is tomorrow at 8:30, if you are able to attend, at 1818 Market Street. And last, but certainly not least, is Christina Madison, who is the founding president and CEO of Madison Advisors, a philanthropy management firm offering innovative solutions to maximize your charitable giving, brand, engagement, and impact through strategic philanthropy. Prior to founding Madison Advisors, Christina served as Senior Vice President at Virtual Health, providing executive oversight for the Virtual Health Foundation and the Virtual Foundation Board. She has over 15 years of experience in philanthropy, which spans from nonprofit and for-profit sectors, and has served in leadership and executive roles, gaining a high level of expertise in strategy, performance, fundraising, and the business of giving. So thank you, and a round of applause for all these amazing panelists. Again, I can definitely email out to those who didn't get the email this morning or last night, the full bios, because I think that they're definitely worth reading because we have the experience of our panel is quite amazing. A little bit of the agenda before we begin. We're going to have a panel. I'm going to ask some questions. I hope you can ask some questions for about an hour. Then we're going to have two concurrent sessions. One session will be held in here, which is called Building a Culture of Philanthropy. And then there will be another session called Building Your Narrative, which will be all the way in that back left corner from you. And then around 4:30, there's networking where you can hop back and forth between sessions, ask questions to the panelists if you're still here, presenters, and then also network amongst yourselves. Okay? So let's begin. And I think with the theme being 360 philanthropy, I want to kind of level set the conversation and ask each panelist, what is philanthropy to them and how do they define it?
For the record, I don't go around in Liberace suits all the time. I'm going to the Marian Anderson Award afterwards, as the Kimmel said. So that's get that out of the elephant, out the room. Guess they put me on the spot, so I'll start right in the middle here. Philanthropy for me, I mean, the definition of philanthropy is the love of humanity. And so for me, I believe that philanthropy really means it's more about your intent and providing resources in the form of not only dollars, but your time, your talent, your ties, your treasure. All are philanthropy. So I think it's beyond the check. It's more about doing things with the right intention. So we'll get a little bit to other ways I believe that people can really participate in philanthropy, but that's what it means to me.
To me, it's charity plus. It's charity supersized. Charity, though, I think it's important to define philanthropy first by what it's not. And it's not just cutting a check. Philanthropy generally is cutting a check plus, and however that looks, depending on the family that might have a foundation and what they care about. It might be an individual and someone in their life who a conversation or something they did change the trajectory of their life, and so they want to give because of that. Philanthropy is usually defined by the person, by the individual or the foundation or the institution's ambition or goal to change the world for a better place. And whatever that means to them is how their philanthropy is manifested. So to me, it's certainly charity because it's giving away something in hopes that something good happens. But philanthropy is when partnerships come together, impact and intent come together. And it's much more than a dollar. It's much more around bringing people together to solve a bigger challenge. So I would like for people to move away from charity and much more towards philanthropy. And a lot of the work that I do, Green Light Fund is around that.
Sure. So I think philanthropy is great stuff already said, but for me, it includes all that and the organization of it and the release of it and getting it out there in the right ways to the right folks to get stuff done. We've been seeing a lot of philanthropy trying to get direct to on a street level, so like micro grants, individuals that may not even have their own 501c3, just people like kind of like the Kiva loan model where you give them the money, they know how to spend it, and how to help themselves. I think that's where I see a lot of it going. I think that's where people know what they can do. They don't need to be studied and surveyed and reviewed and goes back to the Mighty Tower and comes back with some sort of implementation model. I think it's really just having to get it done and get it out there. And I think there's a lot of good happening in that way. If that makes sense.
Building on that, I'm on the board for the Fells Fund, and one of the things that we do is engage in collective reading. And so we all read Decolonizing Wealth together. And that was a nice shaking for me, for someone who had spent years on the other side of like writing grants and courting relationships with funders to try to get the money that's not in the grant, so that you get bigger and better returns for the services you're providing. Trying to bring community members with us into that process of sharing power, reading Decolonizing Wealth from the aspect of being able to sit at a table and make those kind of decisions was, again, a shaking and an awakening. And I think the phrasing that he uses, I think his last name is Villanueva, if I'm not mistaken. The phrasing he uses is around medicine. From the indigenous perspective, he's an indigenous Native American, and he talks about the role of medicine not being just around curing an ill, but around restoring balance and creating harmony. And what if we were to look at money as medicine in that respect? And what does it mean then to use money in a kind of democratized, decentralized manner? And that really shook me up, and so I just add that as another dimension to what we're defining as well.
I think building on what all of you have said, being in the industry on both sides, now working with corporations and high net worth individuals and private foundations, and seeing that side versus the fundraising side of it, I guess I will speak about what philanthropy is not. So philanthropy is charity, and has been for quite some time. is philanthropy effective? Yes, by the definition of way back when it was established as a social elite group for social purposes and tax shelters. So when we fast forward, we're still there. We haven't progressed much far outside of that. So that's the charity part of it. Philanthropy was never designed as a infrastructure as a solution. Philanthropy is for us to get there, but until we blow up the definition of philanthropy, because its origins are achieving what it is achieving today, with concentrations of wealth still in respective areas, while you have nonprofits that I speak about a lot about accuracy of solution, and we have, and I like to say we, because often in philanthropy and fundraising we say the community or those, and until we have our community members around the table to talk about the solutions that they know exist, but they don't have the concentration or access to wealth, we're still going to be in the cycle of the business of philanthropy, where we make decisions for our community when they're not at the table. And I find that disturbing, and I find it as a problem, and all of us, hopefully at this table, and I've had conversations with a lot of us, we figure out, are we contributing to this cycle or are we disrupting it? And I like to think that we are all in a position to really disrupt that. And the last thing, when we look at philanthropy, the thing that's troubled me most recently is within the last 5 to 7 years, we've been at our all-time high for philanthropy, right? Recession and all, we bounced back. But when you look at the progression as far as Black and brown communities, we're at our all-time low and projecting towards. So if we look at the model for philanthropy, we all are investing into a broken system, right? Because if it was solution-oriented, at least it would be, as far as the parallel, it would be some level of a relationship. If we're at our all-time high in philanthropy, we should see an uptick on that other side, and it's not. So until we start to ask those questions, philanthropy is achieving what it was designed to do: social elite, tax shelter, and that doesn't include solutions.
Well, that's a good segue to the next question. So now looking specifically at the Philadelphia landscape, right? Like, what are you doing to kind of fix that broken system? Like, how are you actually impacting and making an impact on the community that are being impacted by all of these negative data points that we all heard a million times? And what are you doing to impact it positively to change that respectively?
And Christina talked about accuracy of solutions, and I believe it's impossible to have accuracy of solutions if you don't bring people who come from the same communities that you're looking to solve the challenges with at the table. And there's been a study by Board Source in 2017. It's called Leading with Intent, and it talked about the board or the nonprofit sector having a Ferguson challenge, where serving predominantly people of color, however, the leadership, 90% of board chairs and executive directors are Caucasian, are white, and only 16% nationwide. And based on, although there was some intent, there was some words, but they found that it was more empty rhetoric, because they saw that based on actions that 20 years from now, it hasn't changed in 20 years, and they didn't anticipate it changing in the next 20 years unless there was some kind of serious intervention, to change that. We started diverse force on boards in 2017 for exactly that reason, to start pipelining professionals of color, bring in more cultural capital, intellectual capital to the boardroom. And our goal was not to just bring, Black and brown faces and put them in high places, but to make sure that they're actually going through a program that they can step on the board day one and make their presence felt on the board, at the table. We're institutionalizing diversity from the mailroom to the boardroom, if you will. And I'm proud to say that we have a lot of folks who are part of that, program. We have 2 of our instructors here and 2 of our alumni and 1 of our participants that are part of the program, and that are here today. And it's been, a great program where we have over 200 now nonprofit organizations who sign up as board matching partners. We've matched many of those who go into the program onto boards, and really the impact is not just the match, but to see the future of these boards starting to diversify, starting to have people who are on the board challenging the conversations and the ecosystem and bringing that diversity of thought to the table, because it's been the same people, same power structures, making the same decisions, and things just treating the symptoms versus getting to the root of the challenges. So that's what we're excited about over the next 10 years or so as we continue to pipeline professionals of color and people from different backgrounds and diversity of social economic status as well onto the boards as well.
We've launched at Urban Affairs Coalition as a fiscal sponsor. We help people start their nonprofits, and so over the last few years, we've pivoted how we bring new programs in who want to start something. We call it seed stage, and the reason we did that was because prior to flipping to seed stage, founders would have to come in, pitch their idea in like a boardroom Shark Tank environment, and have a business plan, and have a budget, and have it look the way we want it to look. And if you're doing grassroots community work, you might not have the skill set to pitch in a way that MBA people are looking at things, or people from business experience are looking at things. But you can do the work. It's just like it's a language thing. It's not knowing how to present in this way that we're expected to be presented. So what we did was, you got a great idea, share your idea. It's a real simple, what you want to do, how you want to do it, and then we give you a shot. And we say, if you can raise the money to do what you want to do, you can do it. So what we do is we reduced a lot of that intake process on the interview side, and said, if you can raise let's figure out what your startup number is. Let's say it's $5,000 or $10,000 or something like that. We'll give you 6 months and resources to raise that money, and once you hit your goal, you can roll it out and do the work. So we bring in probably like 5 to 8 programs in that style, and now we're going to launch probably in the next month, if not sooner. We have third-party funding, so the startups won't have to even raise the fees for us. So they won't have a $2,000 startup fee, they won't have to pay the fiscal sponsorship admin fees. So we're going to look for, we'll do a call for entries, applications, and we're going to pick 3 strong applicants who are going to get that kind of support package, about $12,000 worth of support, in-kind support from UAC, plus extra coaching to help them kind of launch that faster and more of an accelerator model. And we'll also have programs that we don't have funding for 10, but we'll bring 10 through the boot camp, we'll bring 10 in. But the top 3 will get kind of like a full scholarship package. But we're trying to get people, there's a lot to talk about. There's too many nonprofits, but there's not. Everyone wants to do something good. We have to break down the barriers to allow them to do that good and get rid of all the paperwork and compliance issues and do that. And we'll handle that stuff for them, and they can just do what they want to do and make it work. So that's how we're trying to break down some of this stuff.
There are a lot of nonprofits in Philadelphia, and there's even more from outside of Philadelphia trying to get into Philadelphia, right? Because of the nature of the poverty-related challenges in the city. So there are no shortage of 2 to 5 organizations each week that are not here. They're often from New York, Boston, the Bay Area, Austin, Texas, and they want to come to Philadelphia because Philadelphia has the greatest challenge around any number of issues, and they believe that their solution is the best nonprofit solution. Greenlight's role is to make sense of that, and to, instead of having organizations try to push their way into Philadelphia, that we can pull in the right organization with partnerships with government, other local funders, and most importantly, with community. Now, we should identify community earlier, as we noted. Greenlight's greatest value add, I believe, as executive director, is that we don't make any investment decision unless the issue area that we've decided on, the organization that we are looking at, has been vetted and thought through and articulated, the value articulated by the community. The community being individuals who are experiencing poverty in Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, West Philadelphia, Northeast Philadelphia. And before we spend $1, we spend 3 months being invited into homes, into rec centers, into neighborhoods all across the city to speak directly and to hear and listen directly from those families, from those young people, from those mothers, from those fathers. And from there, we design an investment strategy rooted in what the community has said their priorities are. And so everything that follows from that are investments that are made with the community in mind. So organizations don't come into Philadelphia because some wealthy individual thought it was worthwhile. That organizations come into Philadelphia because it solves a need that has been articulated by those who would benefit from the solution we bring. This is a very fundamentally different approach than philanthropy operates in the city or across the country. And across the country through Greenlight. The last thing I'll say is this is the most important part of our work. It's not the raising of the money, it's going into communities in order to articulate what should happen. Because nothing should happen to this community. The community should determine and design what comes into their community. And if we can change that trajectory and that conversation, we think we'll be in a much better place as a city, and we'll also reduce the poverty rate much faster by finding the right things that are the right fit for the communities that they're in.
I appreciate all these answers and perspectives, and of course everybody's work. I think the biggest contribution, I used to think was being on, like, oh, I'm on the board for the Fells Fund, I'm also on the board for Philadelphia Cultural Fund, and like, yeah, I can put out big ideas and thoughts, and like help direct money into places, but I think the biggest space for disruption really gets into this point about data and around who gets to say what data matters, who's a part of collecting that, who's a part of profiting from that, what are the data points going into these frameworks that are being used to vet and to approve what interventions or preventions get used, et cetera. Because people's humanity is just constantly being like run over and bombarded and accosted in so many ways, so that even when we're trying to do well, we end up doing so much harm. And capitalism just creates harm, unfortunately. Like, harm is part and parcel to how capitalism works, and we have to name it and be comfortable with the uncomfortability, right? That is a part of how we have created the 21st century world and what's evolved into being, the current state of international markets. And it's not one person's fault. And no one person is going to rectify that. And I think when we sit in that complexity, it actually, to me, got a little easier. I'll speak for myself. When I sat in that complexity, it got a lot easier for me because I was able to relieve myself of certain pushes. Like, I gotta end poverty. No, I don't have to end poverty, actually. I didn't create it. No one person will end it. It is a collective working job to end it. Same with racism and sexism, et cetera. Homophobia, transphobia, right? No one person can end that. It is a collective endeavor. And in certain cases, some people have more responsibility to help solve for those issues than others. Like, I don't think it is a cis man's responsibility to really address patriarchy and sexism. It is not the responsibility of the impacted to have to address sexism and patriarchy. So I appreciate that women are part of that journey, but I think it's unfair to think that they're going to shovel that, or femme-identified folks are going to shovel the brunt of that work. And so I think you take it to any subject matter and any ism, including capitalism, and I think it's unfair to think that people in poverty are going to have to shovel that work themselves. And getting back to data, where classism also rears its head, nobody wants to listen to folks who have been impacted by poverty. We actually have if you think the opposite way, we have very interesting, simple methodologies we use to determine who gets to work on an issue. So it's kind of like the more money you have, the more we think you somehow have some endowment of knowledge to work on an issue that you have no professional experience with, you have no theoretical underpinnings or background with, so you can go into a field and waste billions, literally billions, on education reform with no theoretical grounding in that area, right? Like, this happens all the time in philanthropy, and it's wild. It is wild. And I just sit back and I'm like, how is this happening? So I consider myself a bit of a rogue scholar, and I'm like, sum it up here. I think, the reality of our lives being finite is real, and I sat in that reality as well for my spiritual self and practices, and was like, if I died tomorrow, what have I left behind for people to continue this work? And not that my ideas are so great, but all of our ideas are so great. Somebody should be able to see our passion and our gifts and our talents and be able to build on them when we're gone. Otherwise, it's really personally driven, right? If nobody can do anything with my stuff when I'm gone, then whoa, what's that about, right? It's a personal magic thing, which is cool when someone's alive, but once they're gone, it's it's temporary. How much wasted potential is there? So in that respect, I'm really working on building out frameworks and methodologies, practices, and tools. There's a budding framework I'm loosely naming Designing for Humanity, got some interesting folks that are putting some money behind some research to really get this moving, but it's right now looking at the intersections between human resilience, market-based resilience, and ecological resilience, because we have a number of problems in the 21st century that we keep viewing as individual silos. So what's it like to actually look at convergence around strength, around growth, and around buffering the impact of really traumatic experiences, whether they're in the markets, whether they're in nature, the environment itself, or whether it's dealing with people and social conditioning, and where's our best opportunity for moving forward in that. And from that space, a lot of voices matter, including the ones who, their humanity we bombard or completely run over. So again, it's about, for me, infrastructure and leaving tools and practices behind.
So to add to that, I'll talk about just how I'm disrupting the spaces I lead. For me, the first thing was being in the field for so long. When I started in philanthropy, I was not welcome. It was like, who's this black young girl? When I started my first philanthropic job, I didn't have the major gifts experience, and I didn't look like everyone else. I was told that I didn't reflect my portfolio. I was like, well, let me go now, because and one person quoted, the chief development officer went away on vacation and bumped his head and brought her back. And that person I ended up mentoring before I left that organization. But where I'm going with this is the work that you put in, finally people have begun to listen. They're like, obviously she knows what she's doing to a degree, or at least I've had a level of experience, and now I do take seriously the platform that I have, right? So if you're sitting in a boardroom or you're sitting with conversations, and our goals around philanthropy is that we want these kids to get a high school graduate from high school, or to get their GED, or we just want them to get a living wage job, my answer to that is that enough, right? Because that's not a solution, right? That's that cycle that we're discussing, and a lot of nonprofits are built around that, to say, let's just get them here, and here is not enough because they're here, right? So I've been trying to challenge those conversations where I can say I come from humble beginnings, and yes, I have an education, and yes, I've been in philanthropy for 15 years, and we haven't seen this work. So that has really helped in some spaces. The unique space that I am enjoying right now is when I first started my firm and talking about corporate social responsibility as far as assessing and designing and implementing for corporations, typically 1 billion and above, I found that they speak a different language than the philanthropic space, right? And we sit on two sides of the room. And the two right now shall never meet. What I am excited about is I was pounding the pavement, and you have to do good, and some corporations can actually outsource their infrastructure to my firm, where they don't have to have that infrastructure. Let's just do it well. Well, what happens is now you had me pounding the pavement and saying, let's do good. And Suleiman remembers these questions. I'm like, yeah, great. And I had a CEO that mentors me and said, stop being a social worker. That's not what CEOs want to hear. And it was the best advice, because when you go into a corporation and you speak their language to say, let me talk to you about your business model and how the dollars that you're spending can be maximized. Let me translate what you consider an expense into an investment. Now you have their ear. Where I can look at your growth portfolio, Amazon failed, right? They thought that they could go in New York, expand because they were Amazon. Where I talk to corporations to say, your philanthropy should arrive before you do. What allows you to think that you have a ticket where you could just plop, right? And Amazon has a huge philanthropic arm. No one had the idea to have their philanthropic portfolio shift 16 months in advance to New York to say, I am a corporate citizen, and this is what we should do. It's just, I'm Amazon, and I'm going to move in, and it didn't work out that way. So now I can talk to businesses and corporations to say, your stakeholders are asking these questions now. Your growth, you can look at your friend Amazon and see that it doesn't work that way. As far as talent, we're in a full employment market right now. Retention, recruitment, all of those things matter, and it can be maximized or solved with dollars that you're spending already. So then now it brings this gap to, okay, how do I do that? Then I talk to nonprofits to say, look, they're analyzing nonprofits as investments now. And they're looking and they're evaluating you much differently. Don't be the blockbuster, right? Where you sit and you think the strategy that you have or the infrastructure has worked or not, because we do have that thing that we just keep trying to make it work even though it hasn't worked for decades, to say, look at how you position yourself as a nonprofit to make yourself as what I call a charity of choice. So now I am able to create portfolios for organizations and help them in their truth, where we analyze their portfolios to say, are you trying to make this impact? Because not necessarily is what you're achieving here. But then we also have this wealth of information that we can share with nonprofits because we know what they're looking for on this side. And that's what I think I learned in my journey, is that there are two different languages. And for our nonprofits, how can you speak the language? And for those companies, I can't tell you how many firms call and say, I have X amount of dollars I have to get rid of in X amount of time. Who do I give it to? So you can definitely tell it's a disconnect.
She hasn't called me yet.
It's typically the financial institutions that call you fast to say, and you know what budget season is. So for this wealth of information that I saw on the side, and I didn't even get all of that when I was in a nonprofit executive role. This has been this new nucleus that has been evolving, that I'm so excited to come back to the community and say, let me tell you what's going on. And that connection I haven't seen exist, or at least be at this frequency that I'm able to facilitate now, which I'm looking forward to the impact thereof.
Could I just respond to that real quick? So we're actually working together
Yes.
on some stuff. I'm really excited because that is exactly what led me to this space around like science and data and tools and people to, because I would talk to folks and be like, man, I'm bringing all this like trauma informed crap to provide to employers, and they're like, I don't have time to be a social worker. We got a profit margin. But when I started to talk about market-based resilience, when I started to talk about shifting and changing tides and economics and trends and unpredictability of markets, they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh snap, this is a lexicon issue and a framing, and it made sense. So I'm just excited.
That's exactly what it is. It's language. You know, that's why I hang around these guys too. You know, I was an entrepreneur trying to get into philanthropy and saying, what's the language that unlocks the chest, if you will. So it's always about the vocabulary, unfortunately. About the vocabulary, it's about the relationships that you're developing, and when you develop the relationship, speaking the language that says, okay, you know, talking about you understand me. And that changes in the private sector, it changes in the nonprofit sector, it changes in, you know, in banks it's CRA, and then it's corporate social responsibility. You got the capital markets talking the ESG alignment, so it's all these different, you know, terminology. You got to have this cultural agility, if you will, of where you're talking and speaking the right language. And unfortunately, sometimes it could be the tail wagging the dog too. And then you got to get back centered with, what do I really want to do? You know, because philanthropy is that invisible hand that'll push you all over the place, and before you know it, you're like, that's not where I was trying to be. You know, I'm trying to language things in a way, and then next you know, you have mission drift on what you're doing. So it's so important to be centered on what you want to do, who are the stakeholders you want to speak to, you need to speak to that have similar philosophies. And you know, sometimes you got to learn the language. I was at the Philanthropy Network conference, and it was a woman who leads a foundation. She was formerly a principal, and she was thinking outside the box as far as how to help communities that may not speak the language to communicate their message. Not, you know, it didn't mean that they were not impactful. So she actually flipped the model where they would come in and her team would write the grant for them. So understand what they were trying to say and then write the grant to themselves so they can speak their own language internally, but say with that, you know, what this organization is going to do, and it's all much more higher return on doing that versus just funding everyone who spoke the language or had great grant writers in that case. And she used an analogy that many of you probably heard at the event. She talked about, you know, Jennifer Lopez in the movie Hustler. And one thing she said that, you know, the world's like a big strip club. She said someone's throwing the money and someone's doing the dance. And the reality is, unfortunately, many times you find that you know, philanthropy's deciding on where the money's going, and people are just dancing to get the money versus, you know, really making an impact. And unfortunately, the intellect behind that, or the ideas behind that, are coming from organizations that cause the problem.
Before I turn it over to the audience, just piggybacking off of or building on that, there's another foundation, the Noble Foundation, and it was in a colonizing, where they actually do this participatory kind of grant making process where they actually let people who apply basically select who the winners are. It's not like the board themselves are saying, going through all of the, doing the grant review and going through and picking, not having any kind of context, but actually, everybody will apply and you get to this round, and then they're saying, as a peer, you deserve this. You are actually going to make the impact that we all want to make. You're going to make it better. So with all these different, speakers coming into the city and talking about all of the amazing things, there's another guy, I think in Cleveland, they do this kind of like Shark Tank kind of round where you basically present to a room full of people, and there are actual grant makers, there are people who are offering like loans, and they put together, I'll say, a financial aid package where you present and they'll say, okay, we'll give you $100,000, and 20 of that will be grants, and 20 of this will be this. So there's all these different models that are coming outside, and those people are coming in to talk, and they've been coming to talk year after year. When is it actually going to change here? Like, what are your thoughts on where the philanthropy is going, where they're actually realizing that they were the ones that caused the problem? Maybe they don't know the solutions as they have their grant restrictions and things like that, and they're actually looking for the community to make the decision on how the money is spent.
Well, Philadelphia Cultural Fund actually operates like that first example you gave with the participatory peer, like.
I am on review.
Okay, So, but it's interesting. Like, the question is, would it if it wasn't created the way that it was created? You get what I mean? Like, so for context, the Cultural Fund, and I think you'll have someone from the Cultural Fund represented at an event on Friday, right? So the Cultural Fund is a 501c3 that is in relationship with the city, if I'm not mistaken, built through the charter back in the early 90s. And so they get a certain allotment of tax money, and it's then handed out to the arts and culture sector. So this is one of the reasons why the board does not make decisions about the money. It is through a peer review process of panelists, and there are site visits from these panelists made up of arts practitioners and enthusiasts and advocates around the city. And it's a very, I think, a very democratic process. I was a part of the process prior to being on the board. It was one of the things that drew me to want to be on the board. The Fells Foundation is much more traditional. It is traditional philanthropy in that respect of like the board makes the choices. But we started a program called Beyond the Grant to the point of philanthropy being charity plus, right? It's not supposed to just be check writing. So what can we do beyond the grant to support you? How do we hear back from you? How do we shut up and listen? How are we sharing power? Not trying to just empower, but like literally taking the power platform we've got and just extending it and helping people to embrace their own power. This is the other piece. It's like we weren't born with power. We either intimidate their power, same with voice, right? We either intimidate their voice, amplify their voice, power, whatever. So I think part of it's on the field to go, what do we want to learn from and replicate that's literally around us? And that's a choice that is probably going to be hard to break through because people have got to want to, I don't mean to ruffle anybody's feathers, but people have got to want to be okay with not being centralized, with not being uplifted, with not being in the papers, not being noted for being like, well, you're a great philanthropist, like you. There is a level of, with decentralization comes this idea of decentering a person or a group of people, and I think that's part of what's holding us back as a region.
The democratization of philanthropy started in government. So in New York City, years ago, they decided to set aside $1 million of their capital budget every year and go to a certain community advisory board and say, here's $1 million allotment for how much money, for where, $1 million for where, which roads should be paved, which bike lanes should be striped, what bridges should be done, and the community was in charge of determining where those dollars go, right? That was a pilot program that eventually scaled up to several $1 million and in different parts of the city. Philanthropy looked at that and evaluated it. Are they getting better outcomes because the community made those decisions than if the streets department or the buildings department made those decisions? And so that is what has to happen here, right? An evaluation of the cultural fund or something like it, and saying, are they getting better outcomes? Likely they are. And so if it's true that the people who will benefit from the investment, if they make the decision about the investment, if you're going to get better outcomes, then it must be true, not just in public expenditure, but also in philanthropic expenditure. And so I do think over the next 5 to 10 years that will be much more likely, but local government, state government will have to take the lead, because in other cities that we've seen, that was the impetus for philanthropy deciding to shift its power, because it's all government doing the same.
So when we talk about philanthropy, and some of you may have heard me say this, we look at it and we treat it different than a business. And I always say, let grassroots be in your heart and not in your operations. Because, it's this feel good. And, when you look at the for-profit world, when I first got into fundraising, and I thought development meant real estate. Because I was for profit, and when they told me that I would ask for I said, so wait a minute, my success is based on me asking for something that someone can give me voluntarily. It's like, can I try this job for 3 months, 6 months to figure out if you want to do this? But in the for-profit world, you look at case statements and business applications and success stories, and you model after that based on the performance or the success of it. In the nonprofit world, for some reason, we all have the best idea, not based on any of that historical performance that we can apply. So it's this decentralized, lack of consistent modeling that doesn't allow for concentration of best practices. And until we shift in that space, we're going to get the same results. So one, we have to, as in our spaces, educate and really also serve as a resource. The other part of this, and Suleiman has heard me talk about this within Diverse Force, we're all accountable in this. So you'll often hear me say, how many of us were excited about Starbucks and Amazon adding minority representation on their board? How many of us was excited? So what happens is we get excited because we have one or we have two. And everyone was excited. I guess they've heard me do this enough, so everyone doesn't raise their hand. But how many of us contributed to Amazon being the first $1 trillion, company without any expectations as to what does your board look like? I'm investing this. What is my community getting in return? And the power play as far as economy is there. As when you look at the spending power for Black and Brown, it's there. So what are we leveraging? And often I tell us we look for the solution when we can be the solution, right? So we have power that we don't even leverage. So for me, it's that shift as well when we look at it, where it's not that we're looking for the solution and the resource, when we empower ourselves to be that. And it's also when people say what's measured is counted, right? And I know that they're just not check a box. We gotta start somewhere, right? And without accountability, what do we have? So I don't think things will change as long as we invest in a broken system. But also, we have to look at corporate and high net worth individuals and family foundations. I have family foundations say to me, it's hard to give away money. And I said, what? Well, when I give it away, I never hear back from the foundation. They don't steward those dollars. And we have to remember, philanthropy is competitive. Fundraising is competitive. It is too many nonprofits in this space. And when you look at a business model, typically when you go into business, the first thing you do is you look at your competitors, right? Am I offering something, or how am I unique that I am going to be effective? In nonprofit space, it's just like, I'm different, and I'm going to do it better, which doesn't necessarily offer the right environment. So again, bridging those two, where you know that in this space, these are the expectations that they have. If we don't intersect the two, it's still going to be the haves and the have-nots, right? So we really have to look at that dynamic and shift it the best way possible that we see, and call a spade in those spaces that we're in. And people often welcome that, right? We don't have time to not be direct anymore. So I think we have to look at that within our respective areas and figure out how we can shift that, and also how we can create some level of accountability and track that along the way for Philadelphia.
Wow. Where do I begin? My name is Charles Lanier, and I'm executive director of a nonprofit, Hunting Park Community Revitalization Corporation. I'm also a board president of another nonprofit, Strawberry Mansion Neighborhood Action Center. And you guys touched on some of the issues related to nonprofits. I don't know if anyone else in this room has this issue, but for particularly small nonprofit, it's capacity. And when I say capacity, meaning that someone said about grant writing. We don't have that person. That's all they do. Find the money. It's in addition to running the day-to-day operations and the meetings and so forth, that executive director has that responsibility. And you talked about competition. Yes, competition is overwhelming. And most of the dollars that a nonprofit receives is also restricted. Okay, so you have your board and you have your mission and so forth, and you have these restricted dollars, and you're looking to build capacity, and so you're out there trying to find money and so forth. And in particularly in our communities, when we talk about development, and I have a philosophy that development should be done by the community, not for the community. But that's not always the case, because developers come in and money up to here, and they drive the development that goes on in the community. And they drive it so that you look at a community where you're at your lowest as far as the tax base is concerned. I mean, it's just, because you're dealing with low income, poverty situations, and particularly we look at housing, and we look at our communities, particularly around housing, and our mission and goal may be housing preservation. And when I say housing preservation, meaning that in our communities, you see the signs. We buy houses, we buy houses, we buy houses. We're pushing people out of the community, buying up their properties, and company developers coming and doing what they want to do. But at the same time, you're saying, no, don't do that. But we don't have the capacity to stay here. Let's look at your property. How can we preserve your property? How can we give you that new roof, give you the windows, give you that heating system? How can we keep that senior in their property when we don't? It's just very, very difficult for us to do that. And it's sort of, I'm looking for an angel, but at the same time, in order to get there, all the hoops that we have to jump through to get to that level, because of not only the restricted dollars, but what you have to do. You have to write the proposal. You have to have the interviews. You have to have, you have to look at all of the steps involved.
There's a lot of expensive money.
A lot.
It's really expensive.
It's very, very. And so, but in the meantime, your communities continue to erode. And as that tax base erodes, okay, that means less services towards for that community, which makes it right for that developer to come in, to get the property at its lowest level of value, and to build and build and build. And we all, and community people have learned the word gentrification and so forth and all, and are sort of scared. Particularly in our area, I don't know if you're all familiar with Strawberry Mansion, but it's changing. It's changing so quickly because of the long money that these developers have. But you also have the nonprofits in the community who's saying, hey, we need to push back. We need to say, you can't take everything from us. We need to do, how do we preserve housing? And that's just a one issue, major issue for, and I can only speak for myself, for my nonprofits that I'm involved with. But it's just that continues that circle of poverty, which makes it a haven for people who have that long money to come in to continue to do what they do and to push people out. And at the same time, your community is losing faith, so to speak. They selling that property for $50,000, and $50,000 is not a lot of money when you're talking about, you know, having a roof over your head. Because if I've been in the property for 30, 40 years and you give me $50,000 for my property, what I gotta do, go get a mortgage and start all over again? You know, so these are just some of the issues and some of the problems that that we face as a nonprofit. Because can the panel kind of speak to that and give me some kind of way that, you know, how do you cut through that red tape? How do you find that angel? How do you get to where the grant writer, I can come to you and say, hey, look, I can pitch this. You know, you talk about Shark Tanks and all that sort of thing. I can pitch this. But your requirement is for me to write this and do the performers and everything else that needs to be done in order to get there, to the dollars.
I think you start with some of the relationships that you have.
I know that people that have invested in that area. The Knight Foundation has invested in that area.
Yes, the Knight Foundation, the William Penn Foundation,
Yeah.
they're finally stepping up.
Right.
They are making investments in Strawberry Mansion, a substantial, not as real well in the scheme of things. Yes, they are stepping up, and so we have cultivated those relationships in Strawberry Mansion.
So here's the deal with philanthropy, and Omar, it would be great to talk to this, talk about this with you. I think even offline. I just volunteered.
Philanthropy.
I volunteer myself as well. The philanthropy is just like, it's talked about as this big old hole, but it's really not. You know, and like really all money is connected to people. And you got to build relationships, right? So the foundation comes in, but who at the foundation are you building a relationship with? And you know, and then it's like it's really strategic mapping and figuring out
you know,
who's got
question.
leverage and blah blah
No
blah.
question.
But there are always dollars, right? Like they might not. So there's traditional funding streams, and then there's this other pot of money that people can pull from at any time. And the best place to be in, one of them, is to be top of mind. So the grants that I've found have been the most impactful, or I wouldn't even just call them grants, but the money that's coming to support things either at the village or in my own work that has been most impactful has been when we've been, or my work has been top of mind, and I'm not writing the grant. Someone's like, oh, we're about to do a thing. We should get the village. Oh, we're about to talk about workforce and black and brown people and what about skill development recently? We gotta talk to Mike, right? Like that's when I find you're in the best position, but that's relationship building, you know, and like purposeful and constant kind of cultivation without overdoing it. It's a bit of, this is gonna feel gross, but it's sales just a bit. You know, and the thing with sales is that term with them, and that's what I hear you talking about. Well, what's in it for me? And what they've got is this need to get money out, right? That's philanthropy's job, literally. So don't ever be afraid to reach out to a foundation in cold and ask to get coffee. The worst they're gonna say is no, but literally it is their job. And I've sat on the other side, like I watched the Philanthropy Network say to each other one time, like, it's our job to get money out. Like, that's our job. And I was in the corner like, yeah, that's right, that is the job. Right? And I was proud of them for saying that. So I just bring all that up because I do think, like, if you were to come up with an idea around, I'm just throwing spaghetti at the wall, how 2 shared grant writers between 10 small nonprofits in Northfield, in Strawberry Mansion, funded by the Knight Foundation, could make a strategic impact on how you're all able to partner with each other, set strategic initiatives, and put a value dollar amount on what you bring in with that person, somebody might fund that, right? Like you can go, when you have the right relationships, you can go to them with ideas and go, we got an idea, what's your appetite for that?
And to piggyback on what Mike was saying, and this is more academic, when you're meeting with Omar, you know, see practice how it works, but I'm a big fan of it, because I haven't seen it much here, I mean, I've heard the concept around collective impact. The idea of making, you know, talk about partnering with other organizations that share a similar vision. So how do you come together and, you know, one, make sure you have a collective vision. 2 is making sure that you're measuring that you identify what are the KPIs, what are the outcomes you're looking to, and have
What's
a
the
unit,
KPI?
key performance indicators
Key performance indicators.
to make sure that we're all speaking the same language. If we're all saying we want to get here, what is it that we're measuring collectively to make sure that we're moving the agenda forward? So identifying what those measurements are. Third is what are some mutually reinforcing activities? If you need someone to be shaking hands and kissing babies and making sure they're getting philanthropy to know that they're top of mind and tip of tongue, having one person that's out at the events networking for the collective. What are some of those ways you can pool your resources to have a grant writer, pool your resources to have a development person, pool your resources collectively to make sure those things are happening. Also fourth one is constant communication, and then also having a backbone organization. When you bring people together, you have to have a backbone, someone that's making sure you're following up, because people get so caught up in things that
That's right.
a
We need a quarterback.
Exactly.
I would add to that, like beyond just having individual organizations work together in a shared service model, I would, at UAC we're 80 separate organizations all under a single EIA number doing all sorts of different things, but we try to get them to work together as much as possible. Like instead of having 15, 20 small nonprofits working in a concentrated area, they all have their own insurance, they all have this, they're repetitively rebuilding their own admin, like shedding individual corporations, like how do you merge and acquire each other and be stronger? So when you're going after money, it's instead of 15 asks that are being received by a funder, they're only getting one ask. And it's large enough that it can draw their attention because you're large enough to draw their attention. Mm-hmm. And so, I see it all the time, lots of small nonprofits, they reach out, but then like some board members don't want to shed their 501c3 because they're like attached to it in an emotional way. But then they go out of business in a couple of years because they're too attached to this thing that doesn't mean anything when they could be doing their work and shifting dollars from admin to mission and going after it that way. We do a lot of this with funders. When our organizations have the same funder, we wrap that up into one application. We meet with them individually, so we take 5 meetings off their plate, and they love that kind of stuff. So like working together collectively, but deeper than 5 organizations working together, becoming one.
Yeah.
I want to give this gentleman a timer.
I'm Bill Longwood. I direct New Heritage Community Development Corporation in the middle of the hood. We're in Allegheny, Lehigh, up in that area. It's a neighborhood I was born into. Spent the first 6 years of my life there. Moved upon the death of my paternal grandfather to East Falls. And I'm back now. We're dealing with a proposed development at the North Philadelphia train station by a developer out of New York who has $10 billion worth of development in their portfolio, represented by Ballard Spar, their partner in charge of real estate and land use. He lives in a house that was on my paper route when I was a kid. I'm about ready to get him moved out of East Falls. So the cure for poverty in North Philadelphia is coming. And it isn't going to come from anybody in this room. And those folks are going to be elsewhere. Despite 5 years of work and my best efforts, there's no stopping this train. The train has left the station. So this is the situation in Strawberry Mansion and Hunting Park. We have had a battlefield that was established 40 years ago when Richard Nixon declared his war on drugs in America and on the people who live in these communities. And the result of that is that they are now in the position that they're in, and they're going to get steamrolled. And government here, is part and parcel of the problem. If you're looking to the Philadelphia city government for a solution, you're going to be looking for a long time. It's a cesspool over there. So this is the environment, that we're operating in. Now, there may be some things that can be gleaned here from this, what could be an opportunity for some. However, for the most part, that neighborhood 10 years out is going to look more like it did when I was born there than it has for the last 40 years, quite frankly. So this discussion is going to shift to Frankfurt and Longcrest and Summerdale and Wissanomi, because that's where all the problems are going to. People have problems, and their problems go with them when they move, or they're forced out. So what I would suggest is that the focus shift proactively to those areas now, because Strawberry Mansion is lost to your community. North Philadelphia is lost to your community. Temple,
I grew up on 1500 Block Big Street, 15th and Lehigh. So that's where
Right.
So it's like right there.
Yes.
So I'm with you. But here's the challenge. Philanthropy, and my struggle with philanthropy is that philanthropy generally has served as early stage capital to pilot ideas that are good ideas that should be scaled. It is an angel and Series A for the nonprofit sector. So for those of you know, you start a business, you know, the first people who are investing in your business are friends and family. And then you have some angel investors who are coming in. And then it's venture capital, Series A, B, C. That helps you grow your business. Nonprofits are the same. You start with your friends and family and close colleagues to start up your initiative. And then you get foundations to come in at different levels that get different amounts. Right? So that's been the role of philanthropy. Philanthropy until the 60s, aside from what Andrew Carnegie did with public libraries, has never been about the broad establishment of a public good, because government spends so much money and takes too long. Philanthropy would rather seed good opportunities where they can and let the rest be the rest, because the people determine government. Now, all of that said, how is North Philadelphia lost? Probably. Are the challenges moving to other places? Yes. But what we do know in other cities is that philanthropy is funding the research and the data to inform government on where these things are moving. Because often, sometimes, government agencies don't provide that data, or they do it and they don't make it publicly available. So, what's the role of philanthropy here to save some of these cities? It has to be around continuing to partner either with government or on its own to identify what other places call the suburbanization of poverty. This is not it. This is poverty moving across the city in different pockets because it's being pushed out. There has to be some funding around that. The Federal Reserve has begun to look at that, but no one else. Right? So there's an opportunity there. The second opportunity for philanthropy could be proactively to bring together community organizations, NACs, CDCs, in advance. Fund them with unrestricted capital. I'm now bringing the two together. Fund them with unrestricted money to either bring them together in an M&A way or to seed anchor institutions in each of those communities that can proactively and appropriately respond to what's coming to them. Now, all I'm saying to you is something that has been said already and people are having conversations about, but there's not leadership. So what I would then put on you is the leadership has to come from the PACDC, and it has to come from communities like NACS and CDC leaders who are going to identify their neighborhood as this is an early warning. This is an early warning indicator because 5 years from now, these things are going to happen because we've seen them happen before. So it's going to take people, and it's going to take an association of CDCs to identify the challenge. That would be my recommendation.
Just to add to that, if we could recognize some of the things that have not worked for us, and we are better united than all of these fragmented organizations. And growing up in fundraising, one of the things we always talked about was fundraisers don't play nice in the sandbox, right? You want your pearls, you know, and you're going to do it better, and it creates this competitive environment where none of us win. So when you look at funders, yes, you have to find some level of concentration because your voice is then amplified. The other part in fundraising, and I'm not offending the grants part of it, but turning around foundations, the first thing that I did was I paused my grants writer. You have to be at a certain level of maturity for grant writing. And I say this because you will write tons of grants, you pay for that FTE, and you're not going to see the return that allows you to stabilize that role. So then invest that in someone that has the relationships and can get out there, because if you look at fundraising, individual giving is here, right? And even if you look at it collectively, individual giving is the entire pile, because who's behind the foundations? Who's behind the corporations? So often nonprofits look at it upside down, where the easiest thing is for us to sit behind a computer, right, and look at these grants opportunities, because that's the most less intimidating role for us. We don't know sometimes how to get out and get those relationships, but that's actually where you get the traction. And I've turned around a few foundations and saw some things work. I mean, the cost to raise $1 was $1.34. In 2 years, we got that to 34 cents. So look, we have to look at our innovative models differently, because the first thing I did was get a rate. You have to have an aim, because otherwise you're in a pile that sometimes doesn't even get looked at. So two, for me, concentration and looking at your model differently.
If I may, really quickly.
Really quickly.
Homeownership. I just want to point some. Homeownership in Strawberry Mansion is actually some of the highest amongst Black and Brown folks. Some of the highest, if not the highest, in the city. That's a huge asset. And how are we organizing with that in mind? So if all of North Philadelphia might fall, and let's be clear about what we mean with all. If you just take, I did some work with law enforcement. I'm an abolitionist, but I'm also a pragmatist, and I believe, like, if I want people to treat Black young people better, I'd rather them get trained by me, because I'm gonna bombard them, versus letting it be some soft stuff somewhere else. So I just like to clarify, like, because you'll hear me talk about abolition, and then you'll hear me be like, I trained some police officers in Richmond. And I like to clarify that. All that being said, I did some work with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Eastern Pennsylvania. We were in Strawberry Mansion. I actually worked with a bunch of your folks. And one of the things, and so the village of Arts and Humanities where I'm at, is the other side of this district, the 22nd Police District, right? So Poplar to Lehigh, for those that don't know, Poplar to Lehigh, 10th Street to 33rd, over 100,000 people. If home ownership is really high in a huge section of the 22nd Police District, have we focused initiatives on how to secure people in place? What's it like to start creating a neighborhood trust? What's it like to start thinking about cooperative owning of a land? What's it like to think about refortifying these three-story brownstones, but coming up with, you know, packages where it's like, this is in the house, this is in the family for 100 years if we get you X amount of funding to change the facade and blah, 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 blah. There are strategies to keep people in place, but that's not what we're organized around. So I like to sometimes challenge back through questioning, because I appreciate what you're saying, because there's a reality that's here, right? There's that article about Broad in the area and that new hotel people want to put up. Woof. The village has organized a question that's reimagining our business model. And that question for us is both research and practical. It's how do we work with 100 families to own 100 homes, sustain with 100 jobs for 100 years, right? Large enough to be scary, but small enough that it's all modular. So if we want to start with jobs, for example, I don't need to start thinking like, how do we get 100 jobs? I need to go, who are the 5 to 10 employers that we can build a working relationship with, refine and pilot a thing, and get them to invest 2 jobs apiece, and we're building our way there slowly. Same with home ownership, the whole nine. But I just wanted to talk about that asset, because around ownership, because that gets lost when we talk about North Philly, and we have to remember that the home value might be low, but Black and Brown people are owning their homes, and that is an asset that's got to be
We're trying to keep
invested
the state in there.
Exactly right.
That's our challenge.
Was curious, are there other trends that nonprofits should be thinking about when they think about changes that are happening in terms of language, culture? One of the things that was brought up earlier was the sense of collaboration. Funders may be more inclined to support nonprofits that come together and present a joint effort. And as it was kind of highlighted, individual nonprofits may be scared to do so because they're scared to give away resources. They may think, I don't want to share 100,000, I want to get all 100,000, not realizing that you may not get anything. So are there other trends that nonprofits should be thinking about so that
That is the trend.
they are there other trends that they should be thinking about in terms of the industry so that they could be prepared for these changes?
That is the trend.
Well, so it's interesting because we talk about capitalism and the mindset of capitalism is ingrained in the nonprofit sector. So is that competition for resources as opposed to the collaboration of those resources to get the collective impact actually done, to actually complete the mission that you wrote up to start that nonprofit? But it's I think in trend wise, I see more of these micro grants happening. Funders want to figure out how to give small amounts of money directly. We're working with a lot of programs with that. Also, violence prevention is doing that. We're partnering with them to get $500 into people's pockets, $5,000, $10,000, all around. They have to comply with the city's reporting requirements. So it really costs $1,000 to give somebody $500. So they need all these receipts. They need a W-9 from someone down the block. It's crazy. But solving the micro granting while staying compliant with the rules of the game, I think is something that has to get sorted out. And I think there has to be, there's the repositioning fund, which will pay you to merge and acquire and partner with organizations. And it's a fund of funders, so it's a great way to get in the door and get on the radar of those other funders if you're in that pipeline. You can find a similar organization with a similar mission. I think there's really a lot of there, and they'll pay for you to figure that out. They'll pay for the consultants, the branding, all that kind of stuff. I think that's where some of those things are happening now.
I know one thing that I've seen is the diversification of funding streams. So, going back to that, philanthropy is like that seed money to get the idea going. As a nonprofit, you don't want to spend your whole life asking for money. You're always just asking, and in fundraising, you're just asking, right? So being able to say that, a third of our money comes from, fundraising, a third of our money might come from interest from our endowment, a third of our money might come from contracting work, right? Being able to partner with other organizations for a fee, offering, what you're doing for a fee. So looking at that, and funny enough, when you start diversifying and actually looking at those pockets and how you're actually furthering what you're doing, those original funders more likely will give you more money, right? It's like this vicious cycle, right? So if you're not able to show that success and grow that way, then sometimes that their faith in the mission and what's happening dwindles. But when you're showing that not only do we not need your money really, because we got all the other things going on, but we're now, branching out over here and doing ventures, doing things like that. Oh, wait a minute, we want to be part of that. You're actually making that impact and making that change. We're not only going to give you the money, but we're going to give you more money. So I think that that's something that, nonprofits should definitely start looking at.
I think also to become familiar with the evaluation process that a lot of social or venture capitalists are looking at when they consider their investments. It's an entirely different language. I just sat through a company out of New York that invested in this area, and their parameters as to how they evaluate nonprofits and what they will invest in, it would be good for our nonprofits to be familiar with that. And it's not consistent at times, right? Different organizations will do it differently, but there are going to be some commonalities between some of those evaluations or those metrics that I do believe is very important for nonprofits to begin to familiarize themselves so they can be an attractive investment.
Read up on the social determinants of health. I think that we're finding more people are, or more orgs are being requested to look at longitudinal impact over time for the kinds of things that they're doing. And that's a framework that I think will help people understand, so it's not just housing that we're working on. We're talking about the stability of a family, which is directly connected to educational outcomes, or a job, which is directly connected to workplace stress that bleeds over into the home of the 6-year-old developing mind who's having trouble learning at school where the reading is already low, right? The social determinants of health help you map out and better understand where you're fitting into this larger pie of solving the humanity issues as opposed to the poverty issues.
Any last statement?
And to that question, capitalism has an influence on philanthropy. So what I find in looking at the two industries, you'll find this lag with nonprofits. But it's, I don't know, if it's 5 years, 10 years. But you can see where for-profit capitalism is going. To Christina's point, understanding that, you kind of get a sense of where the nonprofit, philanthropic sector is going, or where the nonprofit sector needs to start leading. It talks about design thinking and obviously data and different topics that corporate has been talking about for years. Now you start to see it permeate in the nonprofit sector and how organizations are funding as well.
We're commercializing nonprofits and we're monetizing mission. And it's both great for nonprofits because it helps them diversify their revenue stream, but it can be difficult for certain types of nonprofits that are difficult to commercialize and are focused on basic needs, right? And so that's going to be tough. The last thing I'll say around this last move is we've defined philanthropy around wealthy individuals giving money, and the one thing I didn't do a good job of earlier is challenging that philanthropy has existed, particularly in communities of color, for a very, very long time. We just didn't call it philanthropy, and so we should constantly address what is philanthropy in our lives, right? You all do it probably every day, every month, every year. You just don't call it that. And so broadening the sphere of what we define as philanthropy may help us see the common humanity in each other, and also allow us to uplift the role of philanthropy to be much more thoughtful, rather than simply left to those who happen to have a lot of zeros at the end of the network.
All right, well, thank you. That was amazing. I appreciate the time. I don't know if you guys want to stay. But in this room, again, we're having a conversation on building a culture of philanthropy. And then in the room, all the way in the back corner over there, we'll be talking more about narrative and KPIs and metrics and how to collect data to tell your narrative story. So I thank you for coming. You can stay here if you want to do the building your culture of philanthropy corner in the back, and then hopefully at the end there'll be 30 to 20 minutes of this networking where you guys can come together to network, talk to the presenters if they're still here, and also feel free to jump. If you want to do both sessions, feel free to move back and forth. But thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.